Hi everyone, this is Jason Barrick of Wall Street from East Street. Welcome back to another Wall Street from East Street podcast interview. Today's special guest is a first-time guest. I've been friends with her now for a couple of months. I'm very excited to know her. She's a really interesting person. Wanted to expose her to our audience. Her name is Lauren Rumpler. She's popularly known as the Objectivist Girl, has been speaking on philosophy on shows like Anarchast, Free Talk Live, and Page Against the Machine. She has also spoken on a variety of different topics at Porcfest and led the ladies panel at Keenevention. Hopefully I said that right. Thank you for joining us, Lauren.
Oh, thank you. And yes, you pronounced it absolutely correctly. So I'm very excited to be on. I love the show. So I'm really excited, and it's good to know you as well.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you like the show. We're just I think we've been going on here since 2010, so it's what. Oh, damn, it's almost 5 years now.
Wow.
But, I haven't been doing this full time for 5 years, though, so, I mean, it's just, but, it's been growing pretty rapidly. Anyway, though, you're Objectivist Girl, or at least you were in the past. I don't know if you said you're not doing as much, going forward, but, our listeners out there, what exactly, some of them don't know what it is, what exactly is Objectivism?
So Objectivism is the philosophy of Ayn Rand, and normally that'll send shudders up people's spines, because most people know who Ayn Rand is, and have been told by the left-wing media that she's evil, and told by the right-wing media that she's something that she's not. But Ayn Rand was an author in the 40s, and she wrote Atlas Shrugged, and that's her most popular book. She wrote several other books, including some nonfiction pieces. And so what's important to know about Objectivism is that it's a fully integrated philosophy. And so that means that it goes from metaphysics to epistemology to ethics, and then to what she states is politics, but it's actually economics. But I'll get into that in a second. So her metaphysics state that A is A, and her epistemology states that knowledge is knowable. These are based on Aristotle. So she took these from Aristotle. And so basically what this means is that existence exists, and the epistemology states that existence exists outside of your perception. So your perception is what is causing you to not know as much as you possibly could, because, we're human beings and we're fallible. But the knowledge is still there. And so with technology and with time, we're able to know more things and able to grow in our knowledge base. So that's her epistemology and her metaphysics. Her ethics is very deep and very complicated, but ultimately it's about rational self-interest. And so I like to equate this philosophy with a good philosophy for someone who wants to live independently and free. And so it's good for that. And I felt that Objectivist Girl was kind of finished after I did her ethics, because I don't agree with her politics, which is minarchism. She states it's capitalism, which you and I both know is actually an economic system, not a political system, which is really funny because she called for separation between economics and state. So I'm pretty sure she knew the difference, but somehow, didn't get translated correctly in her material. So, that's pretty much Objectivism in a nutshell.
So she's got then some dicey parts in there where, some of the stuff doesn't make sense then from what you explained, how capitalism obviously is an economic system. So I guess then she just tried to, round peg square hole. She just tried to stick it in there as a political system then, I guess. But I've read Atlas Shrugged. It was a very interesting book. I found it a very good read. It was a long book, but I read it on audiobook, so it was like a good story to learn some of her philosophy from. But it just seems that I think the best way to describe her, the way I've read other things from Ayn Rand, is that she's a libertarian, but she's not an Austrian school economist. So she disagreed, I think, with Ludwig von Mises, right? Where another part of her theory for objectivism on the economic side is that value is objective, right? Whereas the Austrian school with Karl Menger, he started it. The Austrian school, the modern Austrian school of economics was built on Karl Menger's subjective value theory, and then Ludwig von Mises built on that. And I think Ayn Rand while Ludwig von Mises was a libertarian, they just disagreed on a lot of economic things, like the main thing between objectivism and subjectivism.
Actually, she loved Mises, and Mises loved her. He actually wrote her a very beautiful, gushing letter. Not as gushing as Rothbard's, which was 6 pages, but Mises wrote a beautiful letter to her about how much he loved Atlas Shrugged. The issue and the difference between them is their definition of the word subjective. And I actually believe that Ayn Rand was right in her definition of subjective. So subjective is based on preferences, whims, and, all of those sort of things that aren't part of objective reality. Now, she describes objective as being based in reality. So she wanted to point out that, there's a difference between what you like and what is good. And so she wanted to point out that you should be making decisions based on reality and examining reality. And she felt that the definition of subjective didn't cut that. Subjective just states, this is what I feel, instead of this is what is. And so when you're trying to decide in a market what it is that you want to purchase, first you're going to think about the things you need, and then you're going to think about the things you want. And when thinking about the things that you need, you're going to examine reality. And you're going to look at, well, I need food more than I need this new dress. And those are the people that are making good economical decisions for their lives. And that's basically, she totally agrees with Mises. It's just that they use different definitions for those words. And she uses different definitions for a lot of things. So it's not surprising. But yeah, a lot of people don't understand that objective is different for her.
Yeah, it's not surprising for libertarians to disagree, right? What's the comment about Ron Paul with the cat herders, right? It's like herding cats. So
yeah. It's libertarians disagree about everything, and mostly it's semantics. I just think it's really, really funny because the objectivists actually agree, and I'm just sick of having this fight. Is pretty much why I gave up Objectivist Girl. I'm just gonna write my own philosophy, honestly. She light term goal, not now goal. But I was tired of having the fight with objectivists that explained why it was that they're actually anarchists. They believe in voluntary government, and voluntary government doesn't have the ability to be quote unquote government. The definition of government cannot be voluntary. It just doesn't work. It's not a real government. So they're actually anarchists, but they refuse to accept that, the orthodoxy ones, the ones that want to follow Ayn Rand's every word. And so I just got sick of it, and I'm just going to write my own philosophy.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that have left, the Ayn Rand camp. I think like Rothbard, after he wrote that letter, I wasn't familiar with that letter, but I know him and Walter Block did learn a lot under Ayn Rand, but then they left. I think there was, disagreements with them over certain things, or they got kicked out by, some of the people in her camp.
Yeah. You seen Mozart Was a Red?
No.
It was a short play that Rothbard wrote about meeting Ayn Rand, and it's hilarious. And so I'm actually Jeffrey Tucker. I don't know if you know Jeffrey Tucker.
Yeah, I know Jeffrey. We've had him on.
He's wonderful. He was in the original Mozart Was a Red, and we're going to redo the play at Porcfest. It's very short. It's very good, and it really explains the miscommunication between her and Rothbard very well.
Yeah, that's interesting because I know Rothbard used to write for the Koch Institute with the Koch brothers, and I think Lou Rockwell was involved there initially too, and they left. So yeah, there's just disagreements among libertarians over certain things, and things blow up, and they get out of proportion, I guess. My question for you, since we've been talking about Ayn Rand, how would Ayn Rand see the world today if she were alive?
I think that she would view it much like she did during her time, only with more concern. I don't really know the mentality of the people she lived. I don't know the mentality of the generation she lived in, but I know that it's very frustrating as somebody who's extensively studied objectivism and my view of it. So I'm just going to go from my view of it. It's very frustrating for me to see my generation not care about objective reality. I mean, they read these news stories. We were talking about this before we got on, before we started recording, is that, people aren't able to read news stories and decipher what the skews are and what's true and what's not true. And so, there's a lot of people getting caught up in stories about, the Deflategate scandal or any of those other things. And they're just detractors from what's actually going on in the world, which is, the issues with the oil prices and the petrodollar and the failing economies all over the world. And, people are just ignoring these things because they're not sexy and they're not savvy. And so, it's this, we're a product of television and entertainment. And I feel like Ayn Rand would be more frustrated today than she ever was, because at least in her day, people weren't getting caught up by porn on the internet,
Yeah, it's it's a really sophisticated form of I guess propaganda, or bread and circuses, or what insert whatever type of phrase you want to use to discuss. But there's just so many distractions now. There's a lot of people who can barely pay their bills to put food on the table. A lot of people hate their jobs or hate their relationships and things like that. And they come home from work angry and or depressed and in a bad financial state. And they just want to escape from reality. So whether that's playing video games or watching celebrity news and seeing bullshit about Kim Kardashian or some of these other stupid celebrity gossip. I mean, my mom watches enormous amounts of celebrity gossip. I've tried to get her to read a couple nonfiction books and she won't. But that's I don't want to pick on my mom too much because that's how a lot of people are. And, whether it's sports or entertainment or celebrity gossip or whatnot, it's just kind of ridiculous that, wake up, what's really going on in the world? Like, the U.S. engineered a coup in the Ukraine. The U.S. engineered a coup. We could talk about that maybe later. But there's just so much stuff right now, and a lot of the truths out there on the internet, like you said. I think a lot of the mainstream media, though, a lot of it's just bullshit. There's kernels of truth maybe in some stories here or there, and people may read the headlines. Most people may read the headlines. They'll watch 10, 20 minutes of the mainstream news before they go to bed, or maybe they'll read a little bit of the Wall Street Journal or a little bit of the New York Times or Washington Post or something. And I guess these people, they expect them to be the information gatekeepers, that they've done good research and stuff. But these people are not objective. These people are incredibly biased. They're politically slanted. In some cases with foreign policy learn. I think a lot of the stories are just, coming straight from the State Department or whatever the Pentagon tells them to say, they say.
Agreed. And, it's even worse than that is that even, especially with medical journals, a lot of the subsidies are paid for by the state. A lot of that, all of that research and a lot of companies is paid for by the state. And so you can't necessarily trust everything that's coming out because the state is always going to side with itself. I mean, if something that they want is not medically safe and they want people to use it anyway, I mean, are they going to honestly tell you the truth? I mean, think about that. Think about how people with power behave. And I mean, the state isn't the only example of people in power and people who are corrupt. There are many businesses that practice corruption. And those are businesses I don't choose to deal with. But I mean, even if you reject the idea that the state is corrupt intrinsically, think about the fact that, examine anybody that has too much power and how they behave. And you will see the point that libertarians are trying to make about the state.
Exactly, and that's the problem with, central planning or any type of totalitarian dictatorship or anything like that, is even if it's just central planning, right, where people have some semblance, they think their vote matters, there's still, about 15, monetary mandarins, PhD standard people, these PhD Keynesian economists who all went to the same Ivy League schools, who are deciding, how to run the economy, what interest rates should be, should we buy up, mortgage-backed securities, all this other toxic garbage, instead of, telling the businessmen that, we're not going to bail your asses out. You should have run your businesses more efficiently. We need to let these companies go bankrupt to send a message to the market that you shouldn't have taken risks like this, and if you did, there's going to be consequences. And when these guys know that they're going to get bailouts. There's just moral hazard in the system. They're going to, blow up their firm. They don't care what happens to their company long term because they think they're either going to get a bailout or they're going to get, if they're a banker, they're going to get a big bonus, next month. And they don't care what happens 5 years from now as long as they get theirs now. And I think I say this a lot on our podcast. I think, because of central planning and some of the other things you discussed, it's just created a really bad, perverse incentive structure throughout all levels of society.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you saw, I believe it was People's article on Janet Yellen when she first took office, but it was a very weak attempt to make Keynesianism, speaking of Keynesianism, sexy again. And so the first paragraph, it mentions that she's an open Keynesian. Like, people have to hide that they're a Keynesian. And so, they're trying to make this the new vogue again, and I really hope that it's not going to work.
Well, I think, unfortunately, in the short-term learn, we are waking people up with your work and my work and, the work of other libertarian and free market people in Austrian School of Economics. But it's starting to go mainstream, but it's not going very quickly. So it's not being embraced by the Wall Street Journal or things like that. They have their minds made up that, things have to run on Keynesian economics. Things have to run a certain way. The government has to be involved in this. Government spending is good. The government GDP, the way GDP is calculated, I think we were talking about that before.
Mm-hmm.
There's just so many flaws. GDP is positively counted. Now, unfortunately, when Obamacare spending is increased, people more money of their discretionary budgets comes out for Obamacare spending when, that's money that could have been spent building a new business or buying or having a better life with, going on vacation or buying more goods or services. Instead, it's going to Obamacare, which is a tax and things like that. So until, this mindset is broken, people think differently. They're going to be able to get away with this for a while, at least until maybe the U.S. loses the world reserve currency and the petrodollar. But, there's so many other countries running Keynesian economics. China's running it. Japan's running it. Europe's running it. I don't think Keynesianism will die, tomorrow or anything like that. But one of my goals with doing the work that I'm doing is to just wake more people up that Keynesian economics is garbage.
Yeah, and I really appreciate the work you're doing because it's not like the mainstream media. I mean, whether you want to believe that the mainstream media is in the pocket of the government or not, they're definitely not standing up to them. So, you were just talking about how GDP is calculated, and they're certainly, when they talk about GDP, they're not calling the government out on the fact that they're skewing the way that they're presenting it. I mean, they're not bringing any light to that subject. They're also not bringing any light to the unemployment rate and how that's falsely calculated. So you don't see the mainstream media actually stand up. You know that they know. They just don't say anything. And so, it's just that sin of omission, and they're committing it all the time. And I appreciate the work you're doing because at least somebody that's presenting media, somebody that understands economics is reaching out and saying, they're skewing the data.
I've gotten in some arguments with some mainstream media people, sometimes in a Twitter flame thing, and some of them they know it's a lie and they don't care because they're getting paid a lot of money to basically look the other way and just report whatever their news editor or the higher ups or the sponsors at the news channel say to report. But some of them don't. Some of them really drink the Kool-Aid. So it's kind of a mixed bag, what I would say. So some of them are lying and some of them are just dumb or intentionally ignorant or blind because they're blind ideologues. I mean that's the whole thing with progressivism and Keynesian economics and Marxism and things like that. Is these guys are these people who believe in those systems are blindly committed to them. So if you're a Marxist, right, anything the capitalist does or things like that, you're gonna basically hate. You're gonna want to take it at the barrel of a gun or any way you have to through lying or things like that. And the Keynesians are not going to want to give up Keynesian economics. They use the excuse every Keynesian or Keynesian sympathizer uses, which, by the way, like line by line, I think in the general theory, I'm not sure Keynes ever even said it. They say, oh, Keynes wouldn't have advocated the policy that's going on now. Keynes only said to spend money when the economy is contracted, and then he said to take the money out of the money supply. Well, Keynes also wrote that basically he wanted to completely destroy savings, and he wanted the government to do humongous spending programs and things like that, and euthanize the rentier class. So anyone with capital or savings he wanted to destroy. He wrote that in the general theory, but you never hear anyone bring it up in the mainstream. So I think there's just a lot of sympathizers out there that are, blindly committed to their ideology at any and all costs, and, they come up with new clever excuses to keep their ideology going, whether it's Democrats or Republicans, bureaucrats, Keynesian economists, corrupt people on Wall Street, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. I agree with you. And there's a lot of people out there that are committed to their ideologies. In fact, most people are committed to whatever ideology that they're involved in. And that was one of the reasons I wanted to stop doing Objectivist Girl and start just kind of exploring the world, because Lauren Rumpler Productions is all about exploring the world through new eyes and discovering new truths all the time and comparing and contrasting different ideas. And I want to do a lot on economics, but I didn't want to be seen as just another person stuck in my way of ideology. And I created Objectivist Girl because I'm not stuck in that ideology. I never have been. I've never thought that objectivism was the way, the truth, and the light. So I decided it was better to open up a channel where I discuss all ideas and come to conclusions about it. And that was why I started Lauren Rumpler Productions.
Cool. You're planning now to start covering more foreign the politics and the economies in foreign countries. Let's talk about what's going on in the globe right now. We've seen the oil price crash. We've seen the U.S. I think the U.S. is doing financial warfare on Russia. There's WikiLeaks documents since 2000 that came out, I think, in 2009, saying that the U.S. was planning on destabilizing the Ukraine through different methods. It looks like the Russia's currency was attacked before the oil price. The Russian currency definitely started to fall and collapse before the oil price started to fall. And I think the oil price has even been manipulated down further. Obviously, if you pay attention to my work, Lauren, I don't think the fundamentals justify the drop in the oil price at all. I don't think demand has fallen 50% to justify the collapse in the price. What's your opinion on what's going on in the world right now?
Well, first of all, I mean, America and Russia have been at odds for years. I mean, they're always trying to compete with one another, and I just think that that's, a really toxic relationship that they have. And, I mean, it doesn't do any good for the people involved. The government's purpose is supposedly to serve the people. They're supposed to be servants. And so this war between Russia and the U.S. is doing absolutely no good. It's either between an arms race or, them trying to financially destroy one another so that they can be on top. And so I don't think that this kind of competition between governments is ever a good idea. And I think the one between the U.S. and Russia is probably the most toxic of all. I mean, you sent me an article earlier from the Ron Paul Institute about a potential another Cold War between Russia and the U.S., and I think it's got some real credibility to it. And that would be devastating. I mean, what's your opinion on this article?
I think it's definitely a new Cold War that's starting. I think the U.S. In their foreign policy stuff has viewed that Putin has gained too much power, and they want to drastically weaken him, and they want to hurt Russia a lot. So they've been just coming up for the last since 2009, I think, that they've been plotting different ways to go after Russia and Putin and hurt their economy. I think though the Cold War, like it's hopefully not going to be physical, where there's physical fighting, because Russia still has a lot of nukes, and the U.S. obviously has a lot of nukes. Russia has an enormous amount of nukes still, but it's looking like it's turning to cyber warfare. There's been at least like in Bloomberg, I don't know how much truth there is to this, but there was rumors that Russian hackers planted a virus on the U.S. NASDAQ stock exchange to potentially crash it, and the U.S. has obviously, I think, attack the Russian ruble, and the U.S. put sanctions on a humongous amount of sanctions on Russia to hurt Russia's economy and things like that. So this new Cold War, hopefully it's not weapons where the countries start escalating with violently, but it seems that it looks like a trade war and economic war and things like that. So I think that's the way modern warfare is going, Lauren. The Chinese have a lot of cyber attackers too, although most of the Chinese cyber attacking of U.S. companies is for like stealing like intellectual property and things like that. It's not necessarily always the Chinese military hackers doing it, but it just seems that like other countries, they know the U.S. has a lot of guns and nukes and other we've spent so much money on military technology that they've realized that they really don't want to fight wars with us that way, that they've kind of gone to this economic warfare and cyber warfare as the new as a new type of warfare.
Yeah, I mean, and then you've got Forbes over here talking, like, giving reasons why the U.S. should invest in more homeland defenses because of Russia. I mean, even our U.S. media is pushing for us to start some kind of war with the Russians. I mean,
well, isn't nationalism almost always promoted though? So
that's
I mean,
true.
like. Go read the papers for China, right? I'm sure Chinese papers have, nationalists towards China that are either anti-Japan or anti-Taiwan or, anti-U.S. in some cases. So it just depends. I'm sure almost every newspaper in every country has some type of nationalist slant. But, about the bureaucrats there, with the new Cold War, a lot of these guys I live right outside of D.C., so, and I used to be in politics, years ago before I woke up and became a libertarian and started reading and learning. I can tell you that there's a lot of people in the State Department and, they change regimes too, because they change think tanks, especially a lot of the military-industrial complex people, the people in the Pentagon too. They're willing to flip-flop regimes a lot. And, a lot of these people grew up during the Cold War, so they got their degrees in, Russian studies, or they learned to speak Russian. And, they've always been skeptical of Russia. So they've always, kind of painted them as a villain, even though, a lot of the Russian people during communism, they hated it. they hated it. They wanted out. They were scared to death, of the government and the people running it. But there wasn't much they could do because, most of the people who lived in the Soviet Union didn't have any money. They didn't have any goods. It was very tough to defect back then. So it's just another case of, government military spending feeding on itself. It looks like, the mainstream media, who knows if Boeing or Northrop or Lockheed or some of these other guys are sponsoring, the media companies to run these articles. I mean, we have such a corrupt society. Some of these guys who wrote the articles on the things you said, right, they could be getting, $50,000 in their pocket from Boeing or Lockheed Martin to write that article. They could be getting, $100,000 payoff. It would not surprise me, based on the stories I've heard about, corruption in the economy at all levels, to hear things like that.
Yeah. Speaking of, communist Russia, and people wanting to get out, actually Ayn Rand's book, We the Living, is the closest thing she ever wrote to a biography. And for those who don't know, she grew up in Soviet Russia. And so if you want a really good recount of what it looks like when a society collapses into communism, as Russia looks like it may in, very, very soon, with their currency being down 50% last time I checked, it's going to look ugly again. And, if it weren't for the petrodollar and the stores of our currency abroad, we would be looking at the same thing. In fact, we would have been looking at it a long time ago. But I think one of the things that needs to be mentioned when talking about Russia is Amazon. They totally left Russia. And a lot of people are attributing it to lack of freedom, and they felt like they couldn't really run their company. But honestly, I think that they knew Russia's, economy was going to collapse. They're holding hands in this. Without a company like Amazon having any investment in your country, that's not going to help you financially. And second of all, look at the fact that they left and then the economy started collapsing. News came out literally within hours after Amazon left that Russia's economy was collapsing.
I kind of disagree with you. I don't think Russia will collapse. I think if you look at their balance sheet, their country balance sheet, they still have a very large surplus of reserves. The currency dropping like that in a short amount of time, it does hurt their economy. But they have a lot of oil and gas, they're doing long-term profitable oil and gas deals with China and other larger countries. So they will survive this because they still have oil and gas, and they're not selling it all at market prices. So they're locking it like on a long-term contract at a market price. But yeah,
but it's not really raising the value of their currency though, because it's traded in dollars.
Well, they're also backing their currency, Lauren, with enormous amounts of gold reserves. So I don't know if they've been doing this the last couple of months, but for the last 2 years, most of their trade surplus money, almost 100% in fact, has been going into physical gold purchases. So they I think that's one of the reasons why they were targeted with this economic and financial warfare. From the neocons and the other people is, and the U.S. government won't admit this, is that because Russia is working on the next system, they want to go to the next financial system, and they've been stockpiling gold. So, they're trying to get out of the petrodollar, they're trying to do bilateral trade agreements and currency swaps with China and other countries. They're trying to set up another system, and they're buying gold to get out of the system. It's very complicated, Lauren. So
I'm actually really glad that you brought that up, because I've been talking about that for months with people. People look at me like I'm crazy. So I actually have been attributing Russia's collapse. The U.S. has got to be on board with this, because Russia's been attacking the petrodollar for years, and they're at the forefront of ending the petrodollar. And so, it can't be just coincidence that the two biggest superpowers are fighting with one another, and one wants to destroy the stability of the other. And so, obviously the stronger power destroys the stability of the weaker one, right?
Yeah, but I don't think Russia can stand on its own, because Russia doesn't have a diversified economy. Most of their economy is just really based on oil and gas revenues. I think over 60% of their economy is based on just oil and gas and mining revenues. So they basically need to there's a book out, I don't know if you read it. Jim Rickards wrote Currency Wars. I highly recommend it to our listeners who haven't read Currency Wars yet. He's talking about how Russia and China will do a lot of trade agreements with each other to protect themselves against the U.S. So we're starting to see that with some of the announcements come out with like bilateral trade agreements, larger and larger ones between Russia and China. I think there was even a $1 trillion 30-year natural gas deal that Russia announced with China in the last 6 months, and that was after another larger natural gas contract that was like a couple $100 billion too. So Russia is trying to protect itself from. I think they anticipated this type of attack from the U.S. Now, they obviously, I don't know if they've done a perfect job of defending themselves, but they've been doing a pretty decent job at least of defending themselves. But I don't think Russia is like diversified enough in their economy to stand on their own. But if they team up with China, if Russia and China and Brazil and some of these other countries who don't like the status quo, they don't like how the U.S. can basically just print more and more dollars and send them to the countries while the other countries work their butts off to produce either oil or Toyotas or things like that, then they're going to want to go to a more fair trade system where and that's why the gold standard worked, because when other countries were trading goods and services straight up for goods or services, if one country had a really bad balance of payments, they're running a trade deficit for too long, their currency would come under attack, interest rates would spike, they would have to send gold to the other country to fix things. But because we have a petrodollar, world reserve based debt fiat currency, a dollar standard if you will, where the U.S. can just print more dollars and send them to these other countries, the U.S.'s balance of trade just becomes worse and worse and worse.
Agreed. My recommendation to Russia would be invest in gold very heavily, make friends with China, and probably I would say ditch their currency and start a new currency based on the gold standard. So.
Yeah, they have a ton of other issues there, Lauren. I mean, they have oligarchs, humongous oligarch corruption and Russian mafia and stuff like that. They really need to fix their legal system there.
That's true.
To get more. They need to fix their legal system there in their country to get their investments into the country, because you have oil companies making large investments in the country, and then at a whim sometimes Putin or someone else can take it away. So until they get that fixed, I'm not investing in Russia.
Yeah, I don't think investing in Russia is a wise decision at this point.
Yeah, I'm not investing in Russia until their legal system is fixed. That respects private property rights and things like that. Obviously, court arbitrators can fix it. It doesn't have to be government courts that enforce contract law. It can be arbitration through the private sector and things like that do private sector courts. But they don't have any of that there right now. So if you, I've read stories where if you try to open up a good restaurant or something like that, it can get taken. Someone will figure like an oligarch or something like that will figure out a way to steal it, or kick you out, threaten you to leave the country, or you're risking physical harm.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure exactly how prevalent that is, but I know it's still going on there, at least to a certain extent. Well, let's see here. About 35 minutes. Any more topics you want to cover? You want to talk about the New Hampshire Free State Project, or your millennial point of view perspective on anything, on any topics you wanted to cover?
Well, I'll always take an opportunity to pitch, coming and living in a more free society. If you guys are looking for a place to live that you can be with like-minded people, learn new things every day, and feel more free, then you should move to New Hampshire and become part of the Free State Project. Make sure you guys go to freestateproject.org and sign the pledge. And that's my pitch on the Free State Project. And living here is the greatest decision I ever made in my whole life. So I was actually just reminiscing about it yesterday. I've been here for a year and a half, and I got the giggles over it yesterday because I was so happy to be here.
There's a lot of libertarians there now. Not everyone's there's limited government libertarians and anarcho-capitalists and different types of
even
libertarians.
Religious. There's a few religious libertarians out here. Quite.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of buying and selling of goods in Bitcoin, and people are having grass-fed beef and organic food and paleo and things like that.
We have the oldest Bitcoin here in Manchester. We have the oldest Bitcoin meetup in the world.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Well, in wrapping up this interview, Lauren, please tell our listeners where they can find more of your work if they want to check out some of your new podcasts, because your ideas are very interesting to me. I've only read Atlas Shrugged. I'm not a big expert on Ayn Rand, but I do want to eventually start reading some of her other works and explore that, because I find her it's very thought-provoking to read the stuff she says. The Alan Greenspan essay that he wrote when he was I wouldn't call him a libertarian or an objectivist anymore, but when he wrote Gold and Economic Freedom, that essay, that was a really beautiful thing, one of the best things I've ever read. And I think Ayn Rand, she carried on besides Aristotle. I think also a lot of her work follows in the tradition of Frederick Bastiat and the law. A lot of it's also, I think, based on that too.
Yeah, I have my views on Alan Greenspan. I'm pretty sure he went Francisco d'Anconia, and if you don't know what that means, then you should read Atlas Shrugged. But I actually, in my latest song, Secret, which I performed with Jordan Page at an event at Ron Noise's place. Jordan Page is a Liberty singer, for those who don't know, and he's wonderful, and so is Ron Noise. And so in my latest song, I did a song called Secret, and it is about Francisco d'Anconia, and it is, and at the end of the song, I actually dedicated it to Alan Greenspan and told him I knew what he was up to. So, anyway, but you can find me at LaurenRumpler.com or Facebook.com/Lauren Rumpler Productions. I also have a show called True Objective, which you can find out about at LaurenRumpler.com. It's a weekly podcast that I do with my co-host, Calvin Thompson, and it covers history, economics, philosophy, politics, love. We talk about everything on this show. Right now, we're in the middle of a president series. You can catch up on that on iTunes, and there's a link to that on the website. And so that'll have its own separate tab. So just click the True Objective tab on LaurenRumpler.com. And then there is another show that I'm starting on the Voluntary Virtues Network, which is called the Transfer of Power Hour. And it is a half-an-hour news show that talks about what's going on in the world and how it affects you as an individual and what you can do about it. And so that's pretty much what I got going on.
So you sound very busy, just like me.
Oh, I am. It's wonderful. Actually, getting to know you has been wonderful because it's been nice to have somebody else that I can talk to and vent with about being so busy.
Oh, you're making me blush now. Okay, well, now I'm a little embarrassed. Well, I just want to thank you again for your time, Lauren, and I enjoyed this interesting, thought-provoking discussion. And let's have you back on again soon to get your objectivist point of view on the world.
Cool. I would love that. And thank you so much for having me on the show. Such an honor.